Driving northwest from Wenzhou, I sometimes could see the products from the road. In Xiaxia, a village 10 miles outside of the city, I passed endless rows of playground equipment. It was stored in bulk everywhere beside the street. Piles of swing sets, big stacks of red plastic slides, long lines of blue and yellow monkey bars. There wasn't a child in sight, and most buildings had the industrial squareness of factories. I pulled over to chat with locals, who told me that making playground equipment had become the local specialty. Xiaxia was part of Chaoxia Township, which was currently home to 270 individual manufacturers, all of them producing some version of the same thing. Half of China's domestic market for playground equipment was supplied by this single town. Another 10 miles down Highway 330, past another bend in the river, the town of Chaotou had erected a statue of a button. It was a huge disc of silver, 10 feet wide and topped by wings that spun whenever the wind came up. Chaotou's population was only 64,000, but the town had 380 factories that manufactured more than 70% of the buttons for clothes made in China. In honor of this status, the village elders erected the statue in the center of town, right in front of a new building called Button City. Button City was 4 stories tall, and the ground floor market was dedicated entirely to Chaotou's distinctive product. Clothes manufacturers arrived to buy in bulk, and sellers organized their wares by size and style. Former peasants hawked buttons out of grain sacks. Big 25-pound bags, still labeled rice and flour, now filled with nothing but buttons. On the day I drove through, many dealers were women with small children, and the kids sat on the cement floor. Whenever they began to cry, somebody tossed them another handful of buttons to play with. I could only imagine how much of Button City was being processed by tiny intestines on a daily basis. And it occurred to me that with a little organization, these kids could be shipped out to Xiaxia every morning to play on the jungle gyms. But there was no overlap between the towns, and moving from one to the other, at least in the economic sense, was almost as absolute as crossing an international border. People told me that even the local dialects were essentially unintelligible. This part of Zhejiang is famous for difficult dialects, and it's also full of one-product towns. Locals tend to specialize in some simple object, in part because they have little formal training, and it's easiest to manufacture something that doesn't require much technology and investment. Whenever Highway 330 led me to a place of decent size, I pulled over and asked a bystander, "What do people make here?" Usually they could answer the question in a sentence. Sometimes they didn't need to say a word. In the town of Wuyi, a man responded by reaching into his pocket and pulling out a handful of playing cards. I subsequently learned that Wuyi manufactures 1 billion decks a year, half of China's domestic market. 50 miles away, Yiwu makes 1/4 of the world's plastic drinking straws. A place called Yongkang produces 95% of Chinese scales. In another part of Zhejiang, Sungsha turns out 350 million umbrellas every year. Feng Shui specializes in pens. Shangguan manufactures table tennis paddles. Datang produces 1/3 of the socks on Earth. 40% of the world's neckties are made in a place called Shenzhou. Between factory towns, I drove through countryside of remarkable beauty.